Welcome to the Insomnia Coach podcast. My name is Martin Reed. I believe that nobody needs to live with chronic insomnia and that evidence-based cognitive and behavioral techniques can help you enjoy better sleep for the rest of your life. The content of this podcast is provided for informational and educational purposes only. It's not medical advice and is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease, disorder, or medical condition. It should never replace any advice given to you by your physician or any other licensed healthcare provider. Insomnia Coach LLC offers coaching services only and does not provide therapy, counseling, medical advice, or medical treatment. The statements and opinions expressed by guests are their own and are not necessarily endorsed by Insomnia Coach LLC. All content is provided as is and without warranties, either express or implied. When Jessica moved back to her hometown with her husband and 2 children, she began to struggle with sleep. She soon found herself spending a lot of time researching sleep and experimented with different supplements and techniques to improve her sleep. When none of these things worked, Jessica found herself becoming increasingly obsessed with sleep and started to really worry about how she'd function if her sleep didn't improve. After all, she was a stay-at-home mum with 2 small children. Jessica started to believe that she had lost the ability to sleep and was losing hope, until she learned more about how insomnia develops and realized that her insomnia wasn't unique or unusual. When Jessica recognized many of the common thoughts and behaviors that perpetuate sleep disruption in her own experience with insomnia, she started to feel a sense of hope. This allowed her to start exploring and challenging her beliefs about sleep while implementing behaviors that build sleep drive, strengthen the body clock, and reduce sleep-related worry and anxiety. Today, Jessica rarely thinks about sleep, and it no longer controls her life. She is able to do all the things she once put off because of concern about how they might affect her sleep, and this has given her a whole new outlook on life. Jessica transformed her relationship with sleep by challenging her sleep-related thoughts and implementing helpful sleep-related behaviors. If Jessica can do it, you can too. A full transcript of this podcast and an accompanying video can be found at insomniacoach.com/podcast. Okay, Jessica, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to come onto the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for asking me to join you.
Absolutely. I always like to just start right at the very beginning with everyone that I talk to, so I'm going to do the same for you.
Okay.
When did your sleep problems first begin, and what do you think caused your initial issues with sleep?
Okay. So it was almost 4 years ago now. So back in 2016, my husband and I moved back to our hometown from Georgia, and that was just a huge transition for us in our life. We had 2 small kids, sold a house, we're looking to buy a house. He was totally changing jobs. We left a community it was just a lot of stress and change. I was also nursing my youngest daughter at that time, and she was not sleeping very well during the night. And I had never really thought about it, but all of a sudden, when she would wake up and I would, put her back to sleep, I wasn't able to go back to sleep then. And so then, the next day I would just feel terrible. And immediately I just began worrying about it and researching, like, what can I do? Like, why is this happening? Trying to really control her and make her sleep so I could sleep. And I remember we had crickets in the rental house we were in, and it was just like something constantly that was keeping me awake. And then it kind of leveled back out for a while, and I never really thought about it. Every now and then, maybe like once a month I would have an off night, especially if we were traveling. But I would always fall back to sleep. So it wasn't like I'd still get a couple hours. But before that, I was just used to sleeping and never thinking about it. Like I fell asleep watching movies I mean, I was just the type of person that like went to bed early, slept all night, didn't think about it. And so then fast forward to like the next fall, it began to be an issue again. And so I was I've always really wanted to like do things naturally, I guess, when it comes to any kind of supplements, medication, that kind of thing. So I sought out like a natural doctor just to see if like I was thinking my hormones were off. I wasn't sure what was going on. And she started me on this cleanse and a lot of supplements. I think some things for the liver and thyroid and just a lot of different things. And for 2 weeks, I felt great, was sleeping great. And then all of a sudden, one night, I woke up at 1, I think, and I could not go back to sleep. So for the next about 10 days, that same thing happened. And I was just I became super obsessed about it. Like, how am I going to be able to function? I'm a stay-at-home mom with, 2 little kids. And my husband was actually going through another job change at that time. So there was just a lot going on too, that now I see that makes sense. But basically, I started experiencing anxiety that week that I had never known before. I had a couple of panic attacks, even concerning not being able to sleep. And I really think that little stretch of time created some different trauma effects in my brain towards sleeping. I thought I lost the ability to sleep. I just felt like I was going crazy. So I went to the doctor because I was really just like, what is wrong with me? And she prescribed Ambien then, just to kind of like see if it would, even things back out. Well, I was super afraid of the medication then. And so anxiety just became a really big issue for me through this. And so she also recommended that I look into, the root cause of anxiety and different things. So I started seeing my therapist around that time. And we've been addressing so many different things in my life, but this sleep issue and my thoughts towards it they just wouldn't leave. No matter, I would get back into a routine of sleeping well, and then I would feel anxious about something and it would just come back full force. And I kept thinking I was over it and it would come back. So that pretty much has been the way it's gone until this last spring when I found your information. And I'm just so thankful. I kind of had heard about cbt-i a little bit just because I had tried CBT. I was doing some cognitive behavioral therapy in my sessions with my therapist. But I just really thought I was like broken up with concerning it. And I didn't think there was hope, honestly. And so that's how it all started.
I think I always like to start with that question, how do you think this all began? Because virtually everyone listening will be able to identify with at least a certain part of your story, in terms of there's almost always this point, this memorable initial trigger, or a bunch of them, and for you, you had this whole list of them, you were moving, you had a baby in the house, that was disrupting your sleep, your husband had changed his job, this huge period of change. And it's, upon reflection, it's quite understandable that sleep would be disrupted. And most of the time, what would happen is as soon as we've adapted to that situation, our sleep just gets right back on track as though nothing ever happened.
Right.
But sometimes what can happen is, quite understandably, we become concerned by this sleep disruption. We start to worry, is there something wrong? Is there like a chemical imbalance in my body? What there's something wrong with me. And that change in the thought process, the change in our relationship with sleep is often what turns what might have otherwise been just this kind of short blip in sleep disruption and can kind of transform it into a longer term problem. Just hearing your description of it in your own words I know is just going to be really helpful for a lot of people.
Well, I totally relate to what you're saying about that. Like, I think for a lot of people, they just would have gotten over it and continued sleeping well. But for me, it became an obsession. And I don't shame myself for that, because
Mm.
I did what I knew to do in that time of my life. But it's good to see that and to know, like, I'm not broken. My sleep, the biological process of that is not broken. It it will always come back. But I've learned that through you, so I'm very thankful.
Yeah, that you made a really important point there, that we shouldn't blame ourselves or feel bad that we've engaged in these thought processes or this
Yeah.
effort to improve the situation, because of course we want to improve the situation. Our sleep is disrupted, so we want to put
Mm-hmm.
effort into fixing the problem. But
Yes.
the thing with sleep is it's different to pretty much everything else in that it responds negatively to effort. So everything else in our
Yeah.
life responds positively to effort, and sleep is the one thing that the opposite is true. So it's
Yes.
quite understandable that we put effort into fixing the situation, but unfortunately, it is often that effort that perpetuates the problem. So it is important, not to blame yourself or shame yourself for the efforts that you put into
Yeah.
fixing the situation, because of course you tried to fix it. It's just a case of um, being aware of the best and most constructive ways of doing that.
Right. Yeah.
So
I
you kind
totally
of,
agree.
yeah, absolutely. You touched upon you were having these issues, waking up around 1 o'clock in the morning and then finding it really hard to fall back to sleep.
Yeah.
Were you typically finding it pretty easy to fall asleep at the start of the night, or was that a problem too?
That was never a problem until I began really worrying about it. And then
Mm-hmm.
I would be so like, yeah, I would say the first year of the occasional insomnia, it was mainly waking up and not being able to fall back asleep.
Mm-hmm.
Now I can even remember the thoughts I would have during that would be, oh no, like I only have a couple hours before my alarm clock will go off. What am I going to do tomorrow? Especially if there was something big happening the next day. Like, I'm going to feel awful. Um, but then as I began to create this anxiety surrounding it, it was even hard to fall asleep. So then if you have both of those things, that makes for some pretty bad nights. So yeah, I would say at the beginning, it was just waking up and not being able to fall back asleep, but it
Mm-hmm.
quickly became all of it. So
Yeah. Yeah, and no wonder that you found yourself increasingly worried and concerned when
yeah,
it first started off as waking during the night, and then it progressed into difficulty falling asleep. Because then in your mind you're thinking, well, I'm on some kind of downward spiral here. What's going to happen next? How can my sleep possibly get any worse? And that can just feed into that worry and anxiety, which in
yes,
turn makes sleep more difficult, unfortunately.
yeah,
So, as you said that you found me, you found Insomnia Coach.
hmm
As you learned more about these evidence-based cognitive and behavioral techniques, was there anything in particular that really resonated with you? Like how like the theory behind these techniques. How did you
yeah,
see them as applying to your life and your circumstances and your relationship with
yeah.
sleep?
Um, I started just listening to the very first podcast I remember, and it really, like, from the beginning, I just felt an immense comfort that I was not
Mm.
alone. Even that there was a coach for this, that I think you mentioned you had suffered a little bit with insomnia.
Right.
And there was just, I would say the comfort of that was kept me coming back and like, okay, there's hope. There's a little bit of hope here. I've never heard this hope before. And then I remember you mentioning the 3 Ps, and sometimes I forget what they are, but precipitating, perpetuating, and you may want to say that.
Yeah, so we have the predisposed, the
Yes,
precipitating, and the perpetuating
there you go.
factors.
Um, like all three of those, I was able to kind of go back into how this began for me and even how it was continuing, and see, it was like, oh wow, this makes total sense.
Mm.
So that was a huge one for me. And then just hearing the fact that, like, sleep is a biological process that happens, and you
Mhm.
really, the gas and brake concept, I guess, of
Mhm.
where the only thing that stops it is hyperarousal. Um, and I knew that, like, I was like, well, I know that is what is happening for me. it started helping, it helped me come away from the idea that like something is wrong with me, and more of this is something like more psychological, I guess, within my mind. But that can be a little disheartening at first, because, then you have to start creating new thought patterns. And it takes time. So those are that's a couple, I think those are the main ones that it was just like right away I resonated with and started observing myself through that. So.
Yeah, I think it can be really helpful just to recognize first and foremost that you're not alone, because it can be really easy to believe that your insomnia is unique or it's different to everyone else's. And when you can hear these stories from other people, you can recognize, so much of your own experience in other people's stories. And then when you can do that, it does give you that hope, because especially when you're hearing stories of transformation, because you can identify, oh, my insomnia was pretty much exactly like that person's. They did this, this, and this, and now they're doing so much better. So that gives you that hope that you can do the same and be successful too. And just to briefly cover that 3P model, it basically just explains how insomnia goes from just this temporary sleep disruption to a longer term problem. And it's so predictable. We actually have a model for it called the 3P model. So the first P is predisposed factors. So some of us are just more predisposed to sleep disruption for whatever reason. Maybe it's genetic. Maybe we're just more reactive to stress. Maybe we have stressful jobs. Maybe we are on call. All these things that just kind of puts a little bit more at risk for sleep disruption. And then we have the second P, which is the precipitating factors. And these are just those initial triggers for that sleep disruption. So maybe we moved house, maybe we ended a relationship, maybe we got into a new relationship, we went on vacation, just a change, just anything. There's as many initial triggers for sleep disruption as there are people in the world. We could be here all day listing all the potential disruptors there are. And normally, once we kind of adapt to whatever that initial trigger was, we'll go back to sleeping as we did before. But sometimes this third P can get in the way, and these are the perpetuating factors. And these are typically all the things we do in response to that sleep disruption, quite understandably, in a bid to improve our sleep. So they might be things like we'll start to spend more time in bed. We'll start to sleep in late in the mornings. We'll start researching sleep, experimenting with supplements, sleepy time teas, trying to add exercise or mix up different types of exercise in our days, cancel plans with friends, all these different things. Basically, sleep just becomes part of our decision-making process in life. And all these things, unfortunately, tend to just perpetuate the problem. And that's how we go from just short-term sleep disruption into a more chronic problem. So I always like to explain that to people, because just as you described, it's almost like knowledge is power, right? Once you can identify that everything you experienced is somewhat normal and to be expected, it can really give you that confidence that therefore this isn't something necessarily unusual, and it can be fixed and you can move past it. So what would you say, you already said that learning about this 3P model was really helpful for you. Did you kind of relate to each of those P's? I could just tell right away when you were talking about moving the baby, they were all really good precipitating factors that fit the model perfectly. Maybe like the more on the perpetuating side, what kind of behaviors were you able to recognize there that may have been feeding your insomnia and keeping it going?
Well, I think really it goes with like the first one, and precipitory and the perpetuating. I really like to seek knowledge and get to the root of something and like figure it out and then grow because of that. I've always been that way. And so when it came to sleep, it was like, I'm going to figure this out. And I'm, which created an obsession with thinking about it all the time and researching and finding a lot of things online that weren't helpful, that created more anxiety. And So I would say that was a big one for me. Like right away, I just started like searching, like, why is this happening to me? What is insomnia? All of that. I also tried magnesium. I tried different supplements, magnesium, melatonin. I tried essential oils, like lavender, chamomile, definitely sleepy time tea. I tried that. Valerian root was a big one. I tried yoga before bed, basically like rearranging my sleeping schedule, even though it didn't make sense really, I guess. So it was like just basically anything that I've read or thought of, I tried. So, and that, I mean, that is totally throwing your body even into a more like change constantly. So none of those really helped either. None of those helped. So, maybe they would if I was, if it was just your normal bedtime routine, like the sleep hygiene, if you're not struggling with it. But when you're in that, I would say they did not help at all. So,
you touched upon it there as well. That kind of endless research and thinking about sleep and conducting all these different experiments, that can really, perpetuate the problem as well, just because you're always trying these new things. And then when they don't work, which on reflection is quite understandable why they wouldn't, because they don't really get to the root cause, these perpetuating factors. When they don't work, then it just leads to this heightened worry and anxiety, that's another thing that didn't work. And it just leaves you scrambling, researching, spending more of your days trying to look for the next solution. And you just end up down this rabbit hole, right, of just always searching, always thinking about sleep and always experimenting, which is really unhelpful.
Yeah. And then, like you said, if it, didn't work, you're like, well, I'm really messed up. Like everyone else says this works, Yeah. So I think I also tried CBD oil. I remember trying that as well. So like pretty much anything you read to try, I try with little success. So
So what would you say was the kind of breakthrough moment for you? Because you tried all these different things, you recognize they didn't work. It's one thing to just say to someone, well, this is why you have insomnia, this is what you need to do. But it's often, words are easy, right? Everything's easier said than done. What was it about, this idea of changing the way you think about sleep that kind of made sense, that made you think, okay, maybe this could work, maybe these techniques will work, and they're different to everything I've tried in the past?
I would say listening to so many success stories was a big factor. And I really just decided to address the fear head on, and the fear of this is going to last forever and I will never be able to do what I really want to do with my life. I decided just to try to get to the root of it. And that was really, like, I would say back in March when I found your podcast and did the 14 days through email. It was like a mind shift of, I can do this. I'm going to do this. I'm not broken. So, that's what
So what were the kind of key takeaways, the kind of little snippets of information that you picked up along the way that you found really helped in terms of building more confidence in your just natural ability to sleep and reducing that sleep-related worry and anxiety?
Yeah, I would say for me, in relation to the anxiety concerning it, I have been recognizing that when I start feeling anxious during the day, which, that happens, like it's been a hard year for me and my family. So like that happens often. And it could be about something big or little, but when that feeling comes, it's almost like my brain immediately starts zeroing in on the issue of sleep. Like, I don't know how to describe it, except it's just, that's what happens. It's like an automatic response. And I have been able to recognize that and then ask myself, okay, you slept fine last night. You're doing fine with sleep. Like, what is the root of this anxiety really? Which has been so helpful just in general for my own personal mental health and life to be able to then not ignore those things that I am anxious about and by zeroing in on sleep. So that's been a huge one for me. I feel empowered now because I know that like I do sleep fine in general. And that I may have a night here or there that are hard, and that's okay because I've had plenty of those and I've gotten back into a good schedule after that. So I would say I feel empowered now.
Yeah.
I know that if I'm lying in bed awake, it's not going to be good to stay there all night, get up and do something. And that's been a huge, like, oh, I'll find a new book. And like one night I read a whole book. Like it was like,
Wow.
that was
Yeah.
kind of fun. It was like maybe half of the book, but it was like, oh, that, I enjoyed that rather than tossing and turning and feeling so overwhelmed. So
Yeah.
that's been a huge one on the behavioral side, I would say, for me. Yeah. And I think that's all I can think of at this moment. But.
Yeah. So they're really great. I think it sounds like what a lot of that thought process, when you found those worries occurring during the day related to sleep,
Yeah.
were perhaps connected to, if I don't sleep tonight, like how am I going to get through the next day? That kind
Definitely.
of thinking, which is really common among people with insomnia, which is actually quite ironic because people with insomnia are probably the world experts on getting through the
Right.
day after a difficult night. So how are you able to kind of address that or recognize that, that even after a difficult night, maybe you can still get through the day. Maybe you could even have a good day, or at least some okay moments. How are you able to get to that point where you just then ratcheted down any temptation to put pressure on yourself to sleep or put effort into sleep?
I would say basically just like acting like I don't I don't have an issue with insomnia.
Yeah.
So one huge thing for me I love to exercise. And when this was all going on, it was like I thought anything that would drain me more of like energy was not. I think I really fell into depression concerning it, and that will lead to a decrease in activity and everything that you enjoy. So I just kind of started, I wrote down, what do I love to do? And I do it no matter what. If I slept none or if I slept a little, like I'm still going to go run. I'm still going to do yoga. I'm going to like cook dinner for my family and just pretend like this isn't an issue. And it sounds like kind of silly, but that's huge. That has been really huge for me. I think something really cool that's happened is I was back in like December and January of this year. For a while, I've been wanting to go to grad school to become a therapist and a counselor. But with this issue with insomnia, I was so afraid to do that. I was so afraid of how I would get through, studies. And then one day, like the stress of being a therapist. But I just got accepted to grad school for that. And I think for me, that has been such a huge, like, I'm pursuing things even though before it would have caused me anxiety because of lack of sleep. And we just got a new puppy. And like, I was so afraid of doing that before because of the factor that the puppy could wake me up at night, and just everything affected this for me. Everything. It had gotten to that point. I wouldn't express it very often, but in my mind, it was constant. And it really gave a negative outlook on life. Like, oh, well, I'm not going to enjoy that. Well, I don't want to go there because I may not sleep. And instead, just like, well, if I don't sleep, I know I will still be okay. And that I probably will the next night. So that, like, it's really, I would say, giving me a better outlook on my life. And I just feel more excited about life, and I'm doing the things I love to do again. And that feels so good. So whether I sleep or not, I am.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, congratulations, first and foremost, making that decision to go to grad school.
Thank you.
That's huge. Congratulations. And it's really good that you've talked us through that experience of adding good stuff to your days, making sure that you remain active, that you have those opportunities for enjoyable moments, and that you don't put off things because of concern about sleep.
Yeah.
Because when we do that, we just guarantee that sleep has a negative role in our lives, and that sleep makes decisions for us, and that we kind of concede control over our lives to sleep.
Yes.
And so, often when I'm talking to people about this, the main goal, right, is to improve your sleep. I want to sleep
Right.
better at night. And then when I start talking to people about, well, what do you have planned for today? What do you have planned today that's going to be fun and enjoyable, and get you moving and not thinking about sleep? People can just think, well, I'm not really interested in improving the quality of my day. I don't really care about my days.
Yeah.
If I improve my sleep, then my days will get better,
Yes.
which is kind of back to front thinking, right? Which we can tell on reflection, because really our sleep depends on everything that we do during the day.
Yeah.
Because if we're active, just being active in itself is a good signal for the body clock to be awake.
Yeah.
And then when we're less active, that's a good cue for the body clock to prepare for sleep, for example. Second of all, when we just do stuff during the day, it's less time to think and worry about sleep. And thirdly, especially if we can add enjoyable activities to our day, these don't all have to be physical activities. They can just be
Right.
things that give us a sense of reward, enrichment, and make us feel good. It's less time for us to think about sleep, and it helps us recognize that we have control over our day. Not our days aren't 100% dependent on sleep. And let's say you had a bad night the night before, it helps you recognize that a bad night of sleep doesn't guarantee a bad day. All that really guarantees a bad day is when we react to that bad night of sleep by canceling plans, staying inactive, not doing things that we've always wanted to do for fear of how hard it might be, because we might have a bad night of sleep, or how it might negatively affect our sleep. So I'm really happy that you shared that, because it's one thing for me to talk about it, from a theoretical standpoint, but it's so different. It's so much more powerful when someone else can talk us through it and say, yeah, I made sure that I did these things. I stayed active during the day. I did these things that I was always putting off, made me feel great, and made me recognize that maybe sleep isn't as big of a deal as I always thought it was.
Yes. Totally relate to that.
When you found yourself kind of worrying about sleep, we talked about, you kind of identified how concern about the effect of a difficult night would have on your day was generating some worry and some anxiety. Was there anything else? What other kind of thought processes were you recognizing that were leading to this sleep-related worry and anxiety? Was it just concern about what the day would be like, or were there other concerns there too?
I think also because I was only staying in the bed or going from one bed to the other and trying to sleep during if I did have a bad night, that was miserable. And so the worry of another miserable night was a big factor. And now I've learned just get up and do something else. So that was one thing. I would say also just I think I mentioned it before, but just the fear that something is really wrong with me. This will be my life forever. I remember just being on a walk or something and seeing other people and wondering do they struggle with this? Am I the only one that feels this way? And so I think those thoughts throughout the day, just it all related. I kind of got to the point where I knew I could get through the day, and no one really even knew I didn't sleep all that night. It wasn't I don't know, I'm just a go-getter, I guess. So I would still do what I had to do. But I just felt miserable on the inside. And so I think that was my biggest fear, of that constant, really just wanting to get rid of the obsession about it and fearing that would never go away. I don't know if that makes sense, but
yeah,
that was my
absolutely.
biggest fear, I would say.
So how did you move past that? Was it just purely just trying to go about life, pretending or imagining that you slept fine each night and just staying active, doing things that you enjoy. Was there something else, anything else that you can share with us for people that might be struggling with similar issues?
Yeah, that's pretty much the main factor. Another little piece of it is, and I don't think I've mentioned this yet, but my doctor had prescribed Ambien, and so I was taking that. And the fear had become so great that I was pretty much taking it every night, just because I would fall asleep, and then I would fall asleep like watching a show. That has been like my norm for my whole life. Like I just always fall asleep watching TV at night. And I was getting super afraid that I was going to be dependent on the medication. And so for me, really what happened was when I tried not to take it and I slept, it was like, oh wow, like that was a big factor for me. I was afraid of being dependent on a medication to make me sleep. Realizing that, one, it didn't make me sleep, that nothing can except your natural process, was huge. And then I think also just observing it happen was just, it felt so good. And that was happening before, but I think just different factors in my life this past couple months was creating a lot. I had a lot of stress going on. So I think it was just getting worse. And then, in order to get through the hard things you have to walk through sometimes in life, it feels even more impossible without sleep. So I was like, well, if I take this, I'll at least sleep. Like it doesn't put me to sleep, but it calms my mind enough to make me like fall into sleep, I guess. I don't know how to word that, but I would say the medication was a big factor. The fact I want to prove to myself that this does not make me sleep. And once I did that, a lot of anxiety fell away for me. So I think that answers the question.
Absolutely. It can be such a confidence boost, right? If you come from this place where you feel that you're dependent on anything, whether it's medication or anything else, or like a magnesium pill, whatever. When you have that night where you sleep without it, it's just such a boost to your confidence, because it does help you recognize that you have this natural ability to sleep. And the fact that you slept without it proves that all that time you slept with it was still sleep that you just generated all by yourself. And that can just be so powerful at building that sleep confidence.
Yes, that has been I would say a big factor in this journey for me, is the empowerment with that.
Yeah. And I think that you touched upon that behavioral aspect as well, of getting out of bed when just being in bed during the night doesn't feel good. That really helps, I think, with the arousal, the anxiety, and the worry too. Primarily we talk about that as more to do with conditioned arousal, so we don't want to associate the bed with unpleasant wakefulness. We want to kind of retrain you to see the bed as a place for sleep. And the only way of doing that is to get out of bed when being in bed doesn't feel good. But I think that one of the things we don't really talk about with regards to that technique is it can just be so helpful at just resetting your mind and giving it something else to think about, compared to being in bed in a dark room, tossing and turning, worrying about sleep. If you just kind of shift that wakefulness out of the bed, maybe read a book, even watch TV, just do something else, it can just distract your mind and just help you refocus and just feel a little bit more calm and relaxed a bit quicker, compared to staying in bed and struggling.
Yes, definitely. I thought of one other thing that I remember it was really a turning point. It was back when I emailed you about the medication, maybe a month ago now. And I was feeling super anxious, and I just wrote in my journal, I wrote out every single fear that I had concerning sleep. It ended up being 30 things that I had been that had just come over the course of 4 years because of so many nights with it. 30, and I probably could have thought of more. Something about seeing that on paper was huge for me. And then beside that, I wrote a list of the patterns I had created, or behaviors I had created because of the fear. And that was I would say that was a turning point. And I'd kind of forgotten about it. But it was a big turning point because I saw it written out. It wasn't just in my mind. And I kind of decided, I'm going to just address one of these kind of at a time. And it may take a while, but I'm going to be kind to myself and do it this way. And the first one for me was just getting back to my bed with my husband. I had started sleeping in our guest room just because I was afraid of my one daughter comes in our bed almost every night. She doesn't anymore, which is great, but she was. And so that was, causing me to then go sleep. So that was my first thing, is I'm going to build confidence that I can sleep even if she wakes me up. And that was like a huge step for me. It tackled a lot of fear in one. So I would for me, I've just decided I'm taking this slowly. And I think it's been really great because the confidence and empowerment that I've received just in tackling one thing at a time has been huge. And not think like before, it was like, I'm going to give myself a couple weeks, and if this doesn't work, then I'm doomed forever. Instead of just seeing it as, I think you mentioned to me one time, it took a while to get to where you are now. It will take a while. It's a process. It's not a quick miracle fix overnight. So.
Yeah, exactly.
No pun intended.
Yeah, no, exactly. Did you find that when you were writing down some of those thoughts or concerns you had about sleep, that once you'd written them down and looked at them, did you find that, maybe that now I've seen that thought written down, maybe that thought isn't even that accurate, but yet it was generating so much anxiety when it was floating around in my head?
Definitely. That was huge. And the funny thing is, I can barely think of them now. Which is, I never thought that would happen. So, but I'm trying to think of one and I can't even think of one. So, I definitely it was like, wow, that's not true. That fear is not true. So.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think that a classic one, which, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm going to guess that you put this one down, would just be that concern over getting through the next day after a difficult night.
Definitely.
So many people just have that as one of their overriding concerns. I'm not going to be able to perform at my job. I'm going to get fired. People depend on me to make decisions. I'm not going to be able to make decisions. But sometimes, all these thoughts, they're completely understandable why you'd have them. But sometimes when you can just take a step back and just look for evidence to support them, and there may be evidence that doesn't support them, that will kind of refute them, just take a more balanced look. And when you do that, you can often recognize that these thoughts that are generating so much worry aren't even, or they're that accurate. There might be some truth in them, but it's probably not 100% true. Maybe it's like 70% true or 50% true or less. And once you can see that, it can really just chip away and lower the intensity of the worry that these thoughts can generate.
Definitely.
So what's life like now compared to back in the day when you were really struggling with sleep? How has your outlook changed? How have your days changed? How has your sleep changed?
Yeah. I think one interesting thing is this change has happened for me during COVID-19. So, life changed drastically, like as soon as I decided to implement these things. But I think for what's awesome is that before I would have been extremely worried about, being stuck inside and homeschooling my kids now and all of that. And that I really haven't even thought about that. So that's huge. I would say just honestly, some days before my thoughts were only on sleep. I felt like I was in a huge brain fog with it. I would be doing something else and still be thinking about sleep. And I don't remember the last day I had like that. And I just can't express how good that feels. And then that alone has given me clarity and energy to think about other things that I actually like. And I feel like I've kind of found myself again. So my outlook has changed 100%, I would say.
Yeah. That's great. I think once you just get to that point where you find that you just don't really think about sleep anymore. I think that's
Yeah.
like the ultimate goal. It's so easy when we're struggling with sleep to set ourselves goals such as, I want to get X number of hours of sleep, or I want to feel great every single day when I get out of bed. But
Yeah.
I think that the best goal is to just be, I want to get to that point where I don't think about sleep anymore. It doesn't
Yeah.
really play an important role in my life anymore. Because not only
Yeah.
does that feel good to be at that state, but when you're at that point where you just don't really care about sleep anymore, that's when the conditions are perfect for sleep to actually happen.
Right. Totally. I've seen that.
Yeah. All right. Well, I really appreciate the time that you've shared with us today. You've shared such great insight. I know a lot of people are going to identify with it. But I do have one last question for you, and it's a question that I
Okay.
ask everyone at the end of these episodes. So you're going to be no different.
Okay.
If someone with chronic insomnia is listening and feels as though they've tried everything, they're beyond help, and that they
hmm
can't do anything to improve their sleep, what would you tell them?
I would tell them they are not alone. Um, Even like no matter how alone they feel, they're not. And that there is hope.
Mm-hmm.
I was there. There is hope. I would tell them to take it as slowly as they need to and
Mm-hmm.
really focus in on the thought patterns that have been created. Um, I would definitely tell them to check out all of your information and your videos and listen to the podcast because it's just really great information. And you're so caring and just answered my emails and questions so willingly. And that was a comfort as well. So yeah, I almost this may sound weird, but I almost just want to give them whoever it is, a hug and just say, you're going to be okay. Because I felt like I needed that at times. So.
Mm-hmm. That's perfect. Well, thanks again for coming onto the podcast. Your story is going to be really helpful for a lot of people. So in a way, your words are going to be that hug for everyone that's listening. So
Oh,
thank
good.
you for coming on.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Insomnia Coach podcast. If you're ready to implement evidence-based cognitive and behavioral techniques to improve your sleep, but think you might need some additional support and guidance, I would love to help. There are 2 ways we can work together. First, you can get my online coaching course. This is the most popular option. My course combines sleep education with individualized coaching and is guaranteed to improve your sleep. You will learn new ways of thinking about sleep and implement better sleep habits over a period of 8 weeks. This gives you time to build sleep confidence and notice results without feeling overwhelmed. You can get the course and start right now at insomniacoach.com/online. I also offer a phone coaching package where we start with a 1-hour call. This can be voice only or video, your choice, and we come up with an initial 2-week plan that will have you implementing cognitive and behavioral techniques that will lead to long-term improvements in your sleep. You get unlimited email-based support and guidance for 2 weeks after the call, along with a half-hour follow-up call at the end of the 2 weeks. You can book the phone coaching package at insomniacoach.com/phone. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Insomnia Coach podcast. I'm Martin Reed, and as always, I'd like to leave you with this important reminder. You can sleep.